Welcome to this series that shall try to explain the concept of consumer protection rights. So this is the first part that will talk about the journey of consumer protection rights as we see them today. So before we dwell deep into this concept, let us just go through this quote which fits beautifully into this concept. It says, "Every time you spend money, you are casting a vote for the kind of world you want." So this quote actually tries to say that every time you're spending your money upon buying anything, you are actually depicting your choices and preferences, which ultimately designs the world around you. So we must know that the consumer rights, as we are seeing them in today's world, have been a result of long endeavors made by the society. There were a number of consumer movements throughout the world for having the consumer rights. What we need to understand next is the value of consumer. Yes, maybe it wouldn't be seeming really fitting well into this concept, but it should be known that the value that the consumer holds is indispensable. Now, many a times, what happens is that the value that the consumers hold is underestimated. We think that consumers are meant only for consuming something, and there is no other significant role that they play in a society. But that definitely is not the case. In Arthashastra, Kautilya talked about the irreplaceable role of the consumers. Weights and measures were fixed to check unfair trade practices. Now, in the earlier times, what used to happen was that the weights and measures were not uniform, due to which the consumers had to face a lot of difficulty. But at the time of Kautilya, in the Mauryan Empire, the weights and measures were fixed uniformly. And this endeavor was made in order to give equal access to every consumer into the market. He described satisfied consumers as the base of a prosperous economy, which definitely now we can relate to. According to him, if the consumers of any nation were satisfied, they were happy. So the nation was very prosperous in economic terms. And also the king was considered to be the father of the entire kingdom. And in that context, it was his duty to keep all the consumers, all the people happy and content in his kingdom. So now we have already understood the concept that the consumer plays, the concept and the role that the consumer plays into in any economy or our society. So we know that consumers help a lot in building the economy. But how? Actually, the consumers make demands, and these demands are fulfilled through production. Now imagine, if no consumer is making any demand, so for what would be the goods produced for? Yes, this is a question to be pondered upon. So actually, the production that takes place into various manufacturing units and industries, the various kinds of services that are available are actually there because and only because the consumers are demanding them. If the consumers stop demanding or they stop consuming any particular goods or services, the production of that particular good or service also comes down. So ultimately, the consumer is the key for healthy and good production. And finally, when the consumers demand, the production is made, what we have in hand is the wealth. So we can easily conclude that consumer is the king. The consumer is primary and the production is for the consumer. The consumer is not for the production, but the production is done to satisfy the demands of the consumers. Now, what next needs to be understood here is that what actually happened in the society that the consumers actually came up with the demand of consumer rights. So firstly, there was a rapid increase in the market size. Definitely, after the Industrial Revolution in the mid-19th century, the size of the global market enhanced. There were no boundaries to the markets and the market size increased very rapidly. So this actually increased the number of people consuming some goods or services. And thus, the rights of the consumers were thought of as a very essential step. Next, there were a lot of unfair trade practices. Now, as we have already seen that the market size was expanding very rapidly, for the purpose of making larger profits, the traders often used unfair practices in their markets. Now, this caused a huge trouble for the people consuming their goods and services. And so, the consumer rights were thought of as the savior. Now, more aware consumers. Definitely, when the market size increased, the unfair trade practices also increased, but fortunately, along with that, the consumers became more aware. Now they understood their value and they knew that whatever production is happening because they are making the demand. So now more aware consumers were definitely the ones who demanded their consumer rights. Now, the mass marketing made producer-consumer relation more complex. Now, in the earlier times, the traders mostly connected directly to their consumers. Many a times, they also had personal relations or personal terms and even were acquaintances of each other. But as the market size expanded rapidly and the mass marketing and mass production of goods and services started happening, the relationship between the consumer and the producer became more complex. So it became very difficult to make the consumer or the producer accountable for whatever goods they were buying or selling. And the consumers increased mobility. Now, this definitely is a result of all the things happening above. With the market size expanding and people moving from one place to another for better opportunities and livelihood, the mobility, the movement of the consumers increased more and more. So this actually these all were the reasons why consumer rights, and that too almost uniform consumer rights, were demanded all over the world. Now, let's understand as to when this concept, this movement for consumer rights actually began to form a formulation and to form a concrete thing. On 15th March 1962, we celebrate the World Consumer Rights Day. But why is it so? Why do we have this particular date and year? So what happened was, in the American Parliament, the then President of America, John F. Kennedy, introduced what we know as the Bill of Rights. So it was particularly and specifically known as the Consumer Bill of Rights. So after the Parliament of America agreed upon this Consumer Bill of Rights, we had the entire act which talked about the consumer rights, and it had these 4 rights in specific. The first talked about right to choice. Second was right to information. Third was right to safety. And fourth was right to be heard. So we can say that it was one of the earliest legislations that talked about particularly the consumer's rights. In this, it was sought that the consumers are the one who should be benefited more, as in it was them who should not be exploited against. And further, later on into coming years, these 3 rights were also added in the statute. One was right to consumer education, then right to healthy environment, and finally, right to basic needs. Now, the consumer rights all along the world, almost in some or the other way, have almost similar rights. But now, we also need to understand in specific as to what was the nature of consumer movement in India. So, the consumer movement in India started around the same time, in the 1960s. But India had some specific problems that were concerning the consumers here. First was the rampant food shortages. Now, hoarding of the food grains and fruits and vegetables has been a very prevalent activity in India. Even today, many traders do this. So, due to hoardings and other such activities, there were very, very acute food shortages that were seen in India. So at that time, the people who were the consumers of these goods, the food grains, the fruits, the vegetables, and similar other goods, they were very much concerned. This caused a serious problem in the society. Added to the rampant food shortages was the prevalence of black marketing. Now, what used to happen was that many traders hoarded these food grains or other items within their control. And at the time of acute shortage, they used to black market these goods to the people who could give a handsome amount, a handsome money for this, which ultimately resulted in that the people who actually deserved and wanted these consuming goods were not available. They were not available to them. Now, this was another serious problem. Now, one another thing that was a cause of concern was the adulteration of food that was happening so rapidly. The food products and various other products that were consumable by the consumers were not of the quality that were expected to be. So the adulteration of food was a serious problem that was causing not only harm to the economy and the society at large, but also to the health of the people and the consumers. And similar other unfair trade practices and unfair market practices were also prevalent in India. Further, to control all of these above reasons and all of these above actions that were happening in the society, we did not have any legal statute that hit directly at the rights of the consumers. Yet, there were a few statutes that we'll be seeing in the further slides that actually tried to control these issues, but there wasn't any statute that talked particularly and specifically about the consumer rights. And finally, due to all these reasons, the consumers in India were very, very dissatisfied. And so they came up with this idea of having consumer rights specific statute in India as well. So these were the other contemporary acts, as we have already talked about. The first was Prevention of Food Adulteration Act 1954. And second, Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act 1969. Though these acts did a good job at the time, they were prevalent in the society, even today they are, but yet they could not address the grievances that the consumers actually had. And so a need was felt that there must be a statute that addresses directly the concerns of the consumers. And so we were fortunate enough to have Consumer Protection Act 1986, which was enacted on 24th December. And that is why we celebrate the National Consumers Day on 24th December. Now, another concept that is connected with this concept and needs to be understood here is the concept of caveat emptor. So, before having any proper and specific statute that safeguarded the rights of the consumers, the concept that was prevalent in the market and economy was of the caveat emptor. Now, what actually is caveat emptor? So this concept says that it is the duty of the buyer to be careful before a purchase. Yes, it sounds very daunting, but yes, this was the concept that actually prevailed in the societies. That the buyer must be careful before making a purchase, that he is not buying anything that is not of good quality, anything that does not satisfy the quantity or any other discrepancy. At this time, the seller of the goods or the services was not at all accountable for selling any under quality goods or services, which definitely was a concern for all the consumers, because the sellers were many a times very deceptive of their products and services, and this caused a serious problem to the consumers as they were spending money to buy products and services, but it was yielding no good to them. But then, thanks to such legislations like the Consumer Protection Act 1986, that the concept completely reversed, and what today we have is the concept of caveat venditor. Now, the liability and the duty, which earlier was on the buyer, has shifted on the seller. So today, under the concept of caveat venditor, it is the duty of the seller to beware while selling the goods. If in case he tries to sell any under quality product or services to his consumers, if he tries to make any deceptive advertisements or anything that concerns or that harms the consumers, he shall be liable for his acts. And so we have seen that this concept of Consumer Protection Act 1986 in India and the similar statutes in various other parts of the world safeguarded the rights of the consumers specifically. And now they can actually enjoy the outcome of their money spending. So we have already understood the concept of the historical development of the consumer protection rights in India and the world all around. This concept holds importance when we talk from the exam point of view. So there can be a few potential questions from prelims point of view. The first is, World Consumer Rights Day is organized on A. 15th June, B. 15th March, C. 24th December, or D. 24th March. Similarly, another question that can be framed from this concept for the prelims point of view is, National Consumer Rights Day is celebrated in India on 1st, 24th March, 2nd, 24th December, 3rd, 15th March, or 4th, 15th December. Now, on the same line, this concept also holds importance from mains point of view. So this question has been already asked in the UPSC Civil Services Exams Mains 2014. So the question is, explain the scope of the rule of paved emptor in the expanding law of consumer protection. And this is a sample question to the same concept, which says, the consumer protection rights as we see them today are a result of long endeavors by the society. Elucidate. So with this, we are done with the concept of the historical development of the concept of consumer rights in India as well as the world. We hope that you understood this concept really well, and this will help you in your exams. Good luck and thank you.